Welcome back to the Deepfake Dialogues. Today I'm speaking with Matthew Fecteau, a U.S. Army Information Operations Officer and PhD researcher at King's College London. He recently wrote a provocative piece in the Diplomat asking, "What happens when a dictator dies, but deepfake technology keeps him in power?" Hi, Mr. Fecteau. Thank you for joining me today. Let's dive right in. So tell me more about your background. How did you become interested in the intersection of generative AI and military affairs?
Well, first off, thank you very much for having me. I actually started this. I was information operations officer in the United States Army, and I've studied international relations quite extensively. And as an information operations officer, you have to keep up with the latest technologies. And I started just researching AI capabilities, and I eventually got accepted to King's College of London, for which I'm going to school right now for my PhD. And I'm studying AI integration into military affairs, conflict, war.
Very cool. So you recently wrote an article in The Diplomat describing a new hypothetical phenomenon called the synthetic sovereign. So for listeners who haven't read the piece yet, you're essentially arguing that Kim Jong-un could become immortal, not metaphorically, but functionally through deepfake technology. So can you paint that picture for us? What would a post-death Kim regime actually look like day to day?
Well, first off, it's hypothetical. I'm sure that there would be everyone wants their time in the spotlight, so on and so forth. And there is some there, from my understanding, there is some secessionist line in place, but it would be just a continuation of what's going on right now, with potentially with Kim acting as Kim who would be dead in a hypothetical world, and he'd be manipulated from his by his counterparts in the government. And quite frankly, this, from what I researched, and even I visited North Korea at one point, and I found that he can very well do it. And as you read in the article, it might actually be beneficial to us just for stability purposes, because if North Korea goes to hell, quite frankly, our economy is going to implode, and there would be a small skirmish that we'd have to get involved in.
Yeah, and so who would actually orchestrate this and why? If Kim dies, someone knows. So who's in that room and what's their incentive to prop up a digital ghost rather than take power for themselves or install a successor?
Well, they subscribe to I'm pronouncing it Juchai, and it's actually the Kim line in North Korea is recognized. They are technically a atheist state, but they worship their rulers like a god. So it would be, who would orchestrate that? It would be anyone who wants to maintain stability and wants to maintain the secessionist line. I mean, quite honestly, if you're not if you're not related to him, you're probably not going to be a rule of North Korea. So that's the issue. So if you can't be a rule of North Korea because you're not related to him. Then the next best thing is just keep him alive and manipulate him through generative models and deepfake technology.
Yeah, and let's talk about the technical feasibility. So
Yep.
how much source material would you actually need to do this? Could state media archives already be sufficient? And does Pyongyang have the domestic capacity to pull this off, or would they need outside help?
They probably, I mean, their domestic capacity is obviously very closed off. They're a hermit kingdom, very isolated. So their domestic capacity, as far as the deepfake technology, is questionable at this point in time. I know that cyber capabilities are significant, and I think they would obviously be investing and investigating the potential for deepfake technology. So if you could use it with old footage, repurpose. You could use repurposed footage, or you could use deep fake synthetic media, and those are two avenues. I think they could use a combination. But is there enough footage available? Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of videos of him, and you see the repurposed footage all the time in the newsreels, so on and so forth. And those are only the fraction of what you see. If you actually visit the country, they videotape this guy all the time, and even when it's there's some questions about his when he shows up. There's some questions about whether it's actually when the video was filmed. So it would be probably a combination of repurposed footage as well as generative footage that would be used to deceive the people. And I'm not saying I don't think the rest of the world would be would mistake him for the real person, because I think our international apparatus, our CIA operations, we have the U.S. anyway. The U.S. has the capacity to actually see test whether it's a fake or a deep fake, authentic or inauthentic, but the people don't, and it's the people are the ones that his cadre of people would be directing this towards.
Yeah, and so I'm just curious. So is North Korea uniquely suited to this, or are they just the most extreme case? So could this template be replicated elsewhere in a different country, or does it require that specific combination of isolation, cult of personality, and information control that is only found in North Korea?
I would say latter. The only case I can find that would be comparable is Turkmenistan, Ashpagat, and Turkmenistan has a similar closed off culture, but it doesn't have the cult of personality. They don't recognize their ruler as a god. There's a couple of things, and also they're more importantly the people there. Some of them anyway, not a lot, but they actually do get a chance to travel overseas and travel abroad. Whereas the people in North Korea, it's essentially a slave state, and you can't leave North Korea. The only people who can really leave North Korea are a few select few. The ruler Kim, he leaves on occasion. So I think North Korea would probably be the only real country in the world where they could pull this off. And I'm not saying it couldn't be possible in Turkmenistan, maybe Eritrea, but I think North Korea is probably the best candidate for this.
Yeah, and this is specifically for using deepfake technology to keep the illusion of the leader alive. Are there other ways in which countries can or have used deepfake technology for nefarious purposes?
Um, yes and no. I mean, we've seen a few cases in Ukraine, for example, where you have where there's deep fakes of both rulers. I have non-state actors could very well use this for nefarious purposes. I actually did write an article about how terrorist organizations could keep their leaders alive perpetually. It's it can be used. I know there was a case in the Congo, which was Ali Bongo in the Congo, where he was actually accused of a deep fake. Ironically, he was not a deep fake. But what I'm seeing is it can be used other countries, but it's just the perception you could be a deep fake can trigger action. So you don't necessarily have to be a deep fake, but if someone just makes the accusation, that could trigger a coup in some of these more unstable countries. So but it's called the liar's dividend, where you just can't believe the truth because the deepfake technology actually undermines the truth. And if it, in countries where if God, not God forbid, but Putin, if he died, the Russians, they could and they may say, oh, that's a deep fake. We can have rulers who do that. We can have military members in compromising positions. That I know there was a couple accusations, and I think it was Myanmar with deepfake technology and the use of deepfake technology to extort key officials. And but yeah, it's being used. but it's more importantly, the liar's dividend is something we need to keep an eye on. I think that's the bigger concern.
Yeah, and let's say they pull this off. So Kim dies, and a synthetic version starts appearing on state broadcasts. How long could this realistically be sustained? So, what's the most likely way it unravels? And in a society as closed as North Korea, could this theoretically continue indefinitely?
It, I mean, theoretically, it could. I mean, North Korea, they recognize their rule as a god, and that's enshrined in their own constitution. They have it's almost 10 principles, and it's almost like 10 commandments, 10 principles, and they are loyal to their godlike figure. And it could. I think the reality is it won't go on forever, but because people want their time in the sun. I know Kim has a family. I know Kim has a sister. I know Kim has a daughter. I'm sure she wants some power too, because she's just like he is. So it will go on so long as they need it to go on until they can find a appropriate successor, which would typically be in his bloodline.
Yeah, and so you touched on the liar's dividend concept.
Good.
The idea that in a world of synthetic media, even authentic footage becomes deniable. So, how does that dynamic play out here? So, could Pyongyang dismiss genuine evidence of Kim's death as foreign disinformation?
Of course, I'm sure they will. Actually, I'd be surprised if they did not. I would be shocked if they didn't. This is a very insidious regime. They want to maintain stability at the expense of the people. And the slave state of North Korea, I mean, and as I point out in the article too, I mean, this might actually be somewhat beneficial to us because it keeps North Korea from imploding, and it keeps North Korea from triggering imploding and then triggering a refugee crisis, which would consume China and also South Korea, which is a close ally of the United States and the Western world. So yeah.
Yeah, and so the most alarming part of your article for me was the nuclear dimension. So walk us through that scenario where a synthetic Kim appears to authorize a strike or issues an ambiguous threat. Who on the outside is making the call about whether that's really him? And do verification protocols exist for this? And would there even be time to use them?
Who would be in the outside world? Who would be who would? I mean, I think if he's going to make a provocative statement, I mean, the outside world is probably going to. That's a tough one. That's a tough. He can make. If I've created a synthetic Kim, I can I can make him do anything, including launch nuclear weapons. And regardless if it's him or not, if I'm in control, I'm still launching nuclear weapons. And so I think our intelligence apparatus is fairly sophisticated. We are able to detect deepfakes, synthetic media, so on and so forth. So we probably can identify whether it's him or not. But the fact is, if there are a group of people, powerful people, who are committed to launching nuclear warheads, they might do it through Kim to to maintain the legitimacy of the action. But still, they are launching nuclear warheads at us, unless it's just saber rattling. And but they do that all the time anyway. So you just don't know. But it's always a possibility. And if I have an intent on launching nuclear weapons, whether it's through a synthetic Kim or if I decide to take over North Korea as a dictator, I'm going to be launching those nuclear weapons. So I think it's foolish to do that, mind you, because if they do launch the nuclear weapons, they will not no longer exist on this earth, as the mutually assured destruction is still a thing nowadays.
Yeah, and so just to wrap up, what do you want listeners to take away from this? So is this a warning, a prediction, or something else?
I want them to take away that synthetic media can be a threat. That we say that synthetic media is there's this sporadic studies done about the impact of synthetic media. Well, North Korea, who's sitting on a group of nuclear warheads, I think that that's a pretty big concern, especially a national security concern. I just think it's something we need to talk about. I think it's something we need to investigate. We need to make a determination what to do in the unlikely case that Kim dies and he becomes a deep fake, or he's a deep fake that's manipulated through his powerful group of associates. So I just think we need to start talking about that and the impact deepfake technology, synthetic media will have on our international relations and national security.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me and for sharing your perspective.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deepfake Dialogues. If you found this conversation insightful, please follow and leave us a review. It really helps get the word out. See you in the next episode.